What's up, everybody? Welcome to Full Draw Friday. This one is number 64. If you didn't, go back and listen to number 63 because that's going to lead into this one. We're doing our Deer Hunting 101 series. Last week was kind of the baseline, how to get started. This week we're going to be talking about when and where. So last week was what you need. This week is when to hunt and where to hunt. And again, for those of you that missed last week or maybe you forgot, it's just very baseline stuff for somebody who's maybe a new hunter, or if you know someone who's a new hunter, hopefully this will be kind of a guide for you to get started. And then we'll go back to getting in the weeds on different topics after I get done with this series. And there's tons of, we've talked for hours about all that kind of stuff in the past too, so you can always go back and listen to those episodes if you're already past this point. Or once you get through this, if you feel like you need more of that, you can go back and look through our catalog of different stuff that we talked about. And then again, keep following along and we'll have some more stuff in the future. But first, if you guys don't know about our sponsor for Full Draw Fridays, then you must not have been listening for very long. You must be new, so let me tell you about him. His name is Rodney Hawkins. He is a land specialist with Midwest Farm and Land. He sold over $7 million worth of ground last year for them. And that's recreational properties, that's farmland, that's residential properties. When it comes to real estate, he pretty much does it all. So if you're looking for something, or if you got something you're wanting to get on the market, he's the guy you need to talk to. He is also running his own company called Ridgehunteroutdoors. You can find them on Facebook. You can message him about all his real estate stuff as well. Through there, it's Ridgehunteroutdoors on Facebook. There he has Fission e-bikes, which are awesome. I've got one of them, and I love it. I'm going to hopefully use it this afternoon going into a spot where otherwise would be a pretty good walk with all my stuff. I don't know if I'm going to take a hanging hunt setup or if I'm going to go to one of my stands. It just kind of depends on what the wind's going to do. But it's going to save me a lot of walking, a lot of packing in. He's also got Tacticam trail cameras, so I know you guys love those. You're going to want to check him out for that. And he's adding new products all the time, too. He's got Radix stands. He's got Radix blinds. He's got a store location in Florida that's going to be opening soon as well. I know he's already doing a little bit of business out of there, but he'll have an office for Midwest Farm and Land as well as his RG Outdoors up there. So if you need any of that stuff, make sure to check him out over there. Go to his Facebook page, RG Outdoors. You can also reach out to us, and we can put you in contact with him if you need that. Now, let's get into the Deer Hunting 101 Part 2, When and Where, on Full Draw Friday, number 64. Okay, so the very baseline for when to hunt seems obvious. Maybe to some it's not. During the season in legal shooting hours. Why I think that's worth mentioning, though, is because that does vary from state to state. Not only does the season vary, like, for example, I believe Kentucky opens always around the 1st of September. I don't think it's the first necessarily, but it's one of the first weekends maybe. That's another thing. Some states will do it like the first weekend around this date or something like that. Other states, like Missouri, will always start on September 15th as far as I know. Illinois is always October 1st. I believe Iowa also is always October 1st. There's some different states where it's like the first Sunday in October or something like that. So keep that in mind, that it does vary from state to state. But another thing is legal shooting hours even vary from state to state. I believe it's South Carolina where you can shoot up to an hour after daylight or an hour before. Most places, it's a half hour before to a half hour after. That's legal shooting light. That's basically when the sun goes down, whatever sunset time is, you got 30 minutes of light left that you can shoot. And basically, that's enough time to be able to, or that's enough light to be able to identify your target and see what you're shooting and be able to make an ethical kill on it without having some kind of aid, thermal scope, a spotlight, whatever that may be. So make sure you read up on those too, whatever state you're in. Make sure you're in your proper season. Make sure that you're taking those animals within proper shooting time, because there are certain things that could happen that could throw up red flags even when you're just checking your deer. And especially if you buy your permits on September in a state that opens in October, and then you try to check a deer in on like September 25th, that's probably going to throw a flag in the system, and you're probably going to get a visit from Mr. Green Jeans. So make sure you're paying attention to all that stuff. On a more in the weeds level, I guess, we're not totally in the weeds on this, but deer usually move in the first hour and the last hour of daylight for most of the season. So that first hour in the morning, last hour in the day, so from the half hour before sunrise to the half hour after, and then half hour before sunset to half hour after sunset. Those are usually going to be your best times to see deer, especially if you're talking about bucks, especially if you're talking about mature bucks, throughout most of the season. October through January, September through January, whatever your season is. Deer just tend to move more in those, if they're going to move in daylight, they tend to move more in those windows because they do move at night a lot. You guys have seen it, even if you don't hunt, even if you're just getting started hunting, driving around in your car, you see more deer at night than you do in the daytime. They feel safer going out at night, less predation, obviously less hunting pressure at night. So in general, you're going to see the most deer first hour, last hour. So if you're fixing to head out for your first time and you just don't really know what time of day to go, that's going to be your best bet. You want to get out there, of course, early enough to get set up. So plan accordingly for that. I like to be set up, a little bit before shooting light, depending on time of year. That's something that you could get really detailed on. But just as a general rule of thumb, if you can get set up, a half hour, 20 minutes before legal shooting light, so we're talking like an hour before sunrise, that'll give you plenty of time to get settled in and make sure everything's good to go before those deer come in and you can shoot them. Also, depending on where you're going in, you might want to be earlier, you might want to be later in some cases, but that's stuff that we'll get into down the road with more of the strategy and things like that. Next week, we're going to talk a little bit more about the how and a little more strategy stuff when it comes to hunting. So I'll leave that there for now. During November, especially in the middle 2 weeks of that month, you will see more movement in the middle of the day. So if you're not really one to get up early, if you can't go late, before time change, some of those evenings can get pretty late, especially if you shoot something. If you can only hunt the middle of the day, maybe you're working a weird shift or something, or night shift or whatever, and you can hunt the middle of the day and that's your window to go. November is going to be your best bet for seeing deer, especially bucks. Mid-November, that, like I said, those middle 2 weeks, that's when they're really going to start moving. From like 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., you'll see a lot more movement in that window, even 10 to 2 if you want to take an hour on either side of that. Some guys during that time period won't even go to the stand early morning. They'll wait and go in at like 9 o'clock and just hunt the middle of the day, or they'll go in at 9 or 10 and then hunt the rest of the day. Some people still like to go in early and get that first hour because it can still be really good in November. I'm not saying they just move in the middle of the day for that time period. It's just that they will move more than normal. They're still going to move the most more often than not in that first hour and last hour. So some people will still go in, hunt the first hour, and they'll just sit all day. You don't necessarily have to do that, but you can if you want to catch all those windows. Maybe you got a Saturday off and you just want to go hunting. You go in early, pack yourself a lunch, and sit all day. That can be really good during the rut, which happens in November. The rest of the year, it's not usually the best bet. Most often, you're not going to see bucks, especially, or really even deer for that matter, depending on where you're set up throughout the middle of the day. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to sit all day. You run the risk of burning yourself out. You run the risk of burning your spot out if you do that all the time. So I try to save those sits for some key days in the rut. If I'm going to sit all day, it's usually going to be like a just perfect weather day or some kind of front had just moved through, and I'll talk a little bit about that here in a second. Something like that is why I'm going to sit all day. Usually I don't, though. I got, too much work that has to be done in the middle of the day is my time to get it done, that and at night. So I'll hunt in the morning and come back and edit and do podcasts and all the kind of stuff that we do here. I'll do that in the middle of the day and then go back out. So I don't hunt the middle of the day a lot. Sometimes I do, based on trail cameras a lot of times as well, which I'll talk a little bit about in a minute. I might go in the middle of the day if I see something interesting in the mornings. There's been times in the rut where on a certain farm, I know when the deer show up, they're usually there and they will stick around for a week or two, and then they're gone. But if I get them coming in at like midnight, I know the next morning there's a good chance they're still going to be there. If I get a picture at like 8:30 in the morning and I'm not there, I may just go ahead and go in, because I've had it happen before. That exact scenario, the deer came back by at 11 o'clock after I'd been there and gotten set up, and he was just 10 yards on the other side of some brush that I could have shot him. So, I mean, it was that close to working out just based on that picture at 8:30, knowing the area, knowing he might come back through. So I don't hunt a lot of middle of the day. I don't hunt a lot all day, but it's definitely an option. However, I would save it for the rut so you don't burn yourself out. The other big win is around weather activity. So whether it be a big storm that blows through and it's rained for like 2 days and the rain's finally letting up on that third day, that can be a great time to be in the woods. Could be high winds. There are a lot of studies done on wind for deer movement. There's a couple windows where it seems to be the best. The wind can be too low for deer to like to move. I think it's maybe because they can hear everything, they can see everything, they get real spooky. They're really hard to hunt when there's no wind at all because it's so quiet, and they can see your movement because there's no leaves blowing around. So there's that end of it. Then it hits, a window from like 5 to 15 miles an hour where it can be really good. They're pretty comfortable. You can get away with a little bit more movement because the leaves are blowing. It covers your sound a little bit better, so not only is it easier to hunt, not only do the deer move a little bit more freely, but it's also easier to hunt. And then you hit a window above that, 15 to, 20 miles an hour, 25, where it's just real gusty and it's constant wind and they don't like to move as much most of the year. Obviously, when the rut comes, a lot of this stuff can go out the window at times, depending on if you have a hot doe in your area. But there's a window there where they don't like the high wind, and then there's some studies to suggest once it gets over that, they'll just get up and move as well. I don't know if it's because they don't feel comfortable laying around in the extremely high winds or what. I don't feel comfortable being in a tree at a certain point, so you got to keep that in mind as well, let alone just in the timber with deadfall and things like that. Maybe that's why the deer get up and move as well. But let's say you get a bunch of those high winds, and then they lay down to 5-10 miles an hour, like they've been blowing hard all day, and then that last hour or whatever, last couple hours, where they've been blowing for 2 days, and on the third day, just like the rain, they lay down. That can be a really good time to go. The biggest one, though, is going to be a cold front, so that's relative as well. You could have 80-degree days for a week straight, and then on the 8th day, the next day following that week or whatever, you have a little bit of a break, and now it's, let's say, 68 to 70, so it's still not cold, but it's 10 to 12 degrees different, especially if we're talking like, let's say, 15 degrees different. That's going to be enough to have those deer up on their feet just because it is that change. So don't think of a cold front as it has to be like 35, 45 degrees. It's all relative to what happened before. If they had a week long of 80-degree weather and now all of a sudden it's 70, that's going to feel really good to them. Just think about it. If you put on your biggest winter coat and you go outside and it's 80 degrees, you're going to want to go right back inside. Now it drops down to 70. It still might be warm, but it feels a heck of a lot better than it did when it's 80. And if you have to move to survive, you're going to do it on those days. However, if you're talking now like 75 dropping down to 50 for the highs or something like that, some crazy temperature drop, those are going to be your best fronts most often. There can be some scenarios where the first day, if it is a huge drop like that, let's say it goes from 65 to the next day, the high is 45 degrees, and the low got down in the 20-something that night, it might be enough to shock those deer a little bit, and they're not going to move on that first day. They just hang tight in their beds. The following day, so the second day after that front blows through, can be really good because they're starting to feel a little bit. They've gotten over that shock to the system of that cold. Before fronts as well, so if you can catch the wind shifting maybe out of the north to blow that cold front in, even if it's still warm, those can be really good sits as well. Before those storms that I was talking about, whether it be snow or rain, thunderstorms, big wind events, before those, there's obviously some kind of weather activity along with that, and those can be really good times. Usually the first day, first couple, 3 days after those events, I think is better, but the days before them can be good as well. So those are times when to hunt, right? That's going to be your best chance of success if you can compile a few of those. So let's say Obviously we're during the season, during shooting hours, first hour of the day, last hour of the day. Let's say last week of November or last week of October, first week of November. Those are generally the best couple weeks of the year, into that second week of November. Put all those together with a cold front that's blowing through, you're going to have a really good chance, especially if you're just out there to shoot a deer. I mean, if you're in the right spot, which is part of what I'm going to talk about next, you're going to have a really high chance of success at a deer in those scenarios. So it doesn't matter, though, if you know when to hunt, if you don't have a place to hunt and you don't have a property where you can go. So the when doesn't matter if you don't have the where. So that's what I'm going to talk about next. There are several options when it comes to where you can hunt. And again, we'll start at a very baseline level. So I kind of break this into a few categories. The first one is going to be the most accessible to everybody. Again, depending on where you live, there might not be a bunch available where you're at, but most places in the whitetail range, it's drivable distance to find some piece where you can go, and that is public ground. It's just what it sounds like. It's open to the public. They have site-specific regulations sometimes, so not only do you have to check your state regulations and follow those, but you also need to go on the DNR website or whatever, or maybe there's a station on that site. You can talk to somebody and figure out what their site-specific regulations are, because, again, it might be different than the state. Your state might not have a point restriction, but that site might, and that just means maybe they require a buck to have 4 points on one side before you can shoot it. There's different things about hunting times, things you have to wear. Some places might require you to wear orange no matter what, whether it's gun season or not. All kinds of stuff. Tree stands that you can use, what you have to do to tag stuff, trail cameras, things like that. Make sure you're up to date on those. I know some places require you to have what they call a windshield card, so you just have to print it off and put it in the windshield of your car or truck when you're in the designated parking spot. That way they know you're hunting. You have to fill that out after every hunt and then turn that in at the end of the season. There's a lot of stuff that's kind of extra that you have to be responsible for when it comes to public land. But if you have nowhere else to hunt, it's really not that big of a deal. None of it is too strenuous that I'm aware of. There are probably some places that it's really crazy, the hoops you got to jump through. But most places, public ground, they make it fairly easy to hunt. And those are, state wildlife areas. They're game and fish owned. They're state owned. They might be national forests, depending on where you're at. Things like that. That's the public ground that's going to be the most accessible to everybody. It has its pros and cons. The pro, obviously, is accessibility. The pro is a lot of times you have a lot of acreage to hunt. There are some huge tracts of public land, sometimes not, but a lot of times you have, a lot of ground that you can cover. You can get away from people. You can try to find different deer. You can mess up and move and hunt a totally different deer herd and still be okay. The cons is kind of the same thing, accessibility. Everybody can hunt it. So, and you have no more right to it than anybody else with the hunting license and all their I's dotted and T's crossed to be on that ground. You have no more right to it than they do. So you could go set up in a tree, and some guy, if he wanted to, could come set up in the tree right beside you. And, you just have to deal with it. You can walk right under your stand. Guys might be bird hunting, running dogs out there on it, just all kinds of stuff. People might just be out for a walk, like a random hike in the woods messes up your entire hunt. That's kind of what you have to deal with on public land. There's a lot of other scenarios and situations that could come up with that, but just know that everybody has a right to it because it's public ground, so you have to deal with that. Doesn't mean you can't be successful on it. There are plenty of guys who are. You look at the Hunting Public, they're one of the most popular hunting YouTube channels. Go watch their videos. They're going to be able to tell you a bunch about how you can hunt public ground. And you can not only learn a lot of stuff from them, but it shows you that you can have success on public ground. Gosh, Austin Stone that we talk to all the time, he hunts a bunch of public ground, really successful. Steve Shirk, same way. He runs a guiding service on a bunch of public ground. They're always killing big bucks out there, it seems like. So it can be done. Just know that it's less controllable than private ground. And that's the next piece to this puzzle is the private ground. And you kind of break that up into three subcategories, I guess, if you wanted to call it that. The first one I'll talk about is permission property, and that is just private ground that you've asked to be on, and the landowner gave you permission to hunt it. It's a small step up from public ground. It can be a big step up if you're the only one with permission. So if you have exclusive permission, that's even better. That's as close to the next ones as we're going to talk about without having to pay any money. But it can be like public ground, especially if you have not a very big piece and you got neighbors hunting on all sides of you, or if more than one person have permission to hunt that property, which happens quite a bit. Especially a lot of people who own land throughout the Midwest are farmers. Farmers don't generally like deer because they eat their crops, so they usually don't turn people down that ask to go hunting. Some of them do, some of them don't. Some of them let everybody go. So just know that you might have to deal with that on permission property. But even if you do, there's still more control in that situation. You can work out, communication plans with the other people who might have permission to hunt it. Maybe it's a deal where whoever's there that day, if there's a truck there, you just go somewhere else. So if you're the person there first, you get to hunt it. The other guy may not come in and bother you, and then vice versa. You got to return that favor. But you do have more control on the permission ground. And if you're looking for that, with the stuff available to us today, like onX, those kind of apps that have the plat books on them, go drive around some of these country roads and look for deer. And if you find deer or a property that looks good, like you might want to hunt, either if there's a house on it, go knock on the door and ask them if you can hunt. Or get on onX, find out where they live. You can look up contact information for them, give them a call, send them a letter in the mail if you have to, and ask for permission to hunt. I'm not saying you're going to get yes. Seems like a lot anymore. You're going to get no more than you are yes, but if it's something you want to do, then it's worth asking. So one thing I would recommend, if you don't know the people, get that permission in writing. If it's not in writing, there's a lot that could be disputed if anything ever happens. So make sure you get that wrote down on a piece of paper. And that way, again, even if you get visited by the conservation officer, if they ask you if you got permission, you tell them yes, they want to see it wrote down. If you can't show them that, it could be a problem for a lot of different reasons, but make sure you get all that in writing. But that's permission ground. I hunt quite a bit of permission property. Fortunate enough that me and the landowners are the only ones that hunt them, so I don't have to deal with a lot of other people on them. But at the same time, I can't do a lot with them either, as far as no timber stand improvement, no really food plots. We do a little bit of broadcasting into some standing crops, but it's mostly ag ground, so that's why they own the land. They're farmers, so that's what they do with it. So when you have permission property, there's not a lot that you can do with it, depending on the landowner, depending on the type of property it is. If it's just some overgrown pasture and they're not doing anything with it, it's not in CRP or anything like that, maybe you can ask them and you could put in a food plot. Maybe you could ask them if they care about their trees. You could go in there and do some timber stand improvement, that kind of stuff. It's all stuff you could get into later, and that's pretty down in the weeds as well, so I don't want to get too far into that for this episode. But just know permission property, I'd say step up from public land in most cases, but still not the most ideal scenario. However, you can absolutely kill deer on permission property, and I'd say easier than you can on a lot of public ground. The next subcategory for the private land would be leasing, and that is a step up from permission. So basically now you're paying for exclusive permission on the property. Leasing is really competitive these days, especially in the bigger buck states, Missouri, Illinois, Iowa, Kansas, especially in Illinois, because you don't have to draw as an out-of-stater, so a lot of out-of-state guys are leasing properties at premium prices. However, the opportunity is not always there either, because a lot of it does get scooped up as soon as word goes out that it's for lease, and word might not ever come out. But if you do have that opportunity, and if you do have the ability to do it financially, that can be a really good way to go, bridge the gap between permission ground and owning property, which is the next one I'm going to talk about. But when you lease, again, paying for exclusive rights to hunt that ground, make sure you get everything in writing on that as well. There's a lot of lease agreements out there, examples of them. You can, if you've got an attorney, by all means, have them look it over. But you can draw one up between you and the landowner that works for both of you guys, get it in writing, get it signed, work out all the details and stuff like that, so you don't have issues in the future. Also, with leasing, if you get a good landowner, or if you get one that let's say they don't have a ton of CRP stuff, or they don't have a ton of ag ground. That's an instance where a lot of times if you're paying for the ground, they won't mind you doing a food plot. If you have, a really good landowner that you're paying, they might even help you with the food plots. They might do the food plots for you. I think there is some room for that within the leasing, especially as expensive as it's getting. I think the people that are paying for the lease could maybe negotiate a little bit more to make it better for everybody. If I'm paying $40, $50 an acre to hunt a property, me personally, I'm not going to do that just for the right to hunt. I want to be able to do what I want to do. And there's some basis for the argument that maybe some of the landowners should do a little bit of that stuff depending on the price that you're paying. Maybe you're paying a little bit extra, so they improve that for you to hunt. Let's just take it a different example here, a hotel owner. If you're paying them $300 a night for a room, you don't expect just a bare bones room to go stay in. You expect it to have nice amenities, breakfast in the mornings, room service, a nice bathroom, a clean space, a room, within the room. It's not always the same when it comes to leasing hunting property. There's a gap there that I think could be bridged between the two parties about what the expectations should be from somebody that's leasing the ground to somebody who is the owner that is leasing the ground out to the people that hunt it. But that's a whole different topic for a whole nother podcast, so I don't want to bore you with all that. I have a lot of thoughts on it, and we'll probably talk about it on an episode coming up. But anyway, leasing, again, just step up from permission ground, but a step down from ownership. And ownership is the next one. That, in my opinion, is the best case scenario because you can do what you want, when you want on the property, whether you own that ground or maybe it's some family ground, especially if you're a first-time hunter. Maybe no one's hunted, this property. If it's grandparents, parents, brothers, cousins, whatever, maybe they own the ground and no one's hunting it, and you're wanting to get into it so you can ask them and go hunt it. That'd be an ideal scenario. But if you own it, of course, then you can do what you want with it as far as food plotting, all the stuff I was talking about, timber stand improvement, native grasses, things like that, the habitat up, and then you can also control who's on it, when they're on it, and that kind of stuff. That's the ideal scenario when it comes to hunting. You don't have to worry about anything except yourself and what you're doing. There's no extra intrusion. No one's coming in. If they are, they're trespassing. You can take care of that issue, hopefully. You can for sure run cameras on it, as many as you want. You can do whatever you want to the land. You can hunt it however and whenever and wherever you want to do it. There's a lot of benefits to private ownership of hunting ground. And that's going to be, when it comes to the where, that's going to be the best case scenario. But that doesn't mean you can't get it done on all the other types as well. And it doesn't matter whether you're hunting public, permission, lease, or you own it. A little bit closer view of it when it comes to where is you need to hunt where the deer are. I mentioned a little bit earlier when I was talking about permission property, finding the deer. You can go drive around and find deer and then figure out from there where they're coming from, where they're going, and hunt there. If you're not hunting where the deer want to be, you're not going to see any deer. You're not going to kill any deer. We call that scouting. If you haven't, if you are brand new to this, that's when you hear us talk about scouting. That's what we're talking about. There's traditional scouting, which is boots on the ground, getting out there looking for deer trails. If you don't know what a deer trail looks like, you can look up pictures of them, but most people will know kind of what a wildlife trail in general looks like through the woods. A beat-down path where they've been moving, you can look for tracks within that to confirm that it is deer that are using it. Tracks are a big one because you can find out for sure there's been deer in this area. How fresh are they? Have we had a rain recently? And is it crusted over? Is it not? All that kind of stuff. Once you find tracks, there's at least been deer in the area. Creek crossings are a big one. Fence gaps, all that kind of stuff. You can look for scrapes and rubs if you're wanting to hunt bucks. And the scrape is on the ground. It's where they paw the leaves out on the ground, and there's usually a licking branch, which is just an overhanging branch, where they'll lick it and they rub their preorbital gland on it. in their nose. They smell it. They pee in the scrape sometimes. It's just a way they communicate. But that's a scrape. A rub is what you see on the tree where it looks like something has rubbed the bark off the tree. So just for the beginners, that's the difference in those two. Usually you won't find a scrape unless there is a branch hanging down or something hanging down. A lot of times you'll see them on field edges. Those aren't necessarily as important as the ones you find deeper in the timber. Same way with rubs. They're not always real important to hunt over, but just know that means there was a buck in that area at some point if there's a rub on a tree. So all that's traditional scouting. You can throw trail cameras into the mix as well and get even better. If you got the ability to put up a few trail cameras, that's really going to help you figure out where the deer are at. If you combine the two, that's when you're really getting into business. You find trails, you find scrapes, you find rubs, tracks, whatever it is. Throw a camera up on them. You can find out pretty quick which ones are the ones you need to be hunting and which ones aren't, because some of them might be old, some of them might be fresh. Deer will use different places at different times of the year, so if you got cameras, you can figure that out. If you don't have cameras, just go sit, go out there and learn. Go out to the woods. That's the best thing I can tell you. You're going to make some mistakes, but just go out there and do it. Try to learn from your mistakes. I would say go in carefully on the outskirts of where you think the deer are to start with. Don't worry about, quote-unquote, wasting a hunt, because it's not wasted if you learn something from it. Go out there and sit the fringes of where you think the most deer activity is. See what you can see. Make sure your wind's blowing at you away from the deer so they don't smell you. And then if you're too far out of the game, you can always move up and just move up slowly, go at it slowly, especially if you're a beginner. And that way you don't mess up your entire hunting spot. Especially, let's say, if the only spot you have to hunt is 40 acres of family ground, the last thing you want to do is go in there too far the first time and run all the deer out, and then you've blown your chances for the most of the remainder of the season. So be careful as you go in, but get out there and learn what you're doing. See the deer move naturally without being bothered, and then make your moves from there. Get closer to where you need to be. Find out where they're coming out on those field edges, things like that, which trails they're using by laying eyes on them. There's a lot of things that even cameras won't see that you can see if you get out there and sit in a stand. So just know the best way to do it is just to get out there and do it. Lastly, some very baseline stuff as far as where you're going to want to hunt, where you're going to find this activity. I mentioned a couple of them. Field edges are a big one. Deer are creatures of edge. If you can find any kind of edge, that's a potential place for deer to be moving regularly. Ridges within, a timber system, of course, or even in the fields. Everybody knows kind of what a ridge is. It's basically just a hill. The bottom third and the top third of those ridges are where deer are going to want to be. In the mornings, hunt high. In the evenings, hunt low. So your thermals are something we could get into, but I won't on this episode. But think about hunting with the sun. As the sun's coming up, you want to go up as well. If the sun's going down, you want to go down. So the bottom third of those ridges in the evenings, top third in the mornings is going to be your best bet. Openings within the timber, so whether that's a clear cut or just a natural opening where they got some browse, that's going to be more edge for them within the timber. It's going to be places for them to go feed. Those are good places to find deer. Creek bottoms, river bottoms, natural travel corridors like that. A lot of times you'll see trails that follow right along the edge of a creek or a river, just where they naturally like to walk anyway. So those are places you can find deer as well. There's a lot of those little things that we will get into more as we go on. We've talked about them a ton on past podcasts, so you guys can go check those out. But that's all I got for this week on the when and where. Hopefully that helps. Make sure, again, if you missed last week, go listen to that one. And then tune in for next week's as well. Part 3 will be the how, and that will probably be the last one of this series. We'll see how much I can get into and if I think of anything else, but I'll talk a little bit more about the strategy and actually how to use things to your favor and stuff like that on next week's episode. And then, right now, I think you're ready to go out there and try it and get out there and learn, but hopefully after next week's episode, you'll have all the weapons you need, all the information to get out there and at least kill your first deer. So if that is you, good luck heading out there. To everybody else as well, good luck. I appreciate you tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next one.